You wake up and before your feet even hit the floor, you've already turned something on. A podcast, a playlist, anything. Not because you want to listen to it. Not really. You just need the room to not be quiet. And if someone pulled the plug right now, if the music just stopped, you'd feel it immediately. Not annoyance. Something closer to panic. You are one of those people who needs background noise to function. And the psychology behind why is a lot deeper than anyone thinks. You are the person who falls asleep to true crime documentaries, who puts on a coffee shop playlist just to answer emails, who turns the television on the second you walk through the door, not to watch anything, just to fill the space. Your friends think it is a quirk, your partner calls it a habit, but you know it is more than that. Silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels loud, and here is what nobody tells you. That need for noise isn't a preference. It is your nervous system telling you what silence used to mean. Picture this. You are 8 years old. The house is quiet, not the good kind of quiet. The kind where you can hear the clock ticking, and every creak in the floorboards, and your own breathing, a little too clearly. So you turn on the television, not because anything good is on, because the voices fill the room, and suddenly the house feels like someone's home. Maybe your parents were fighting in the other room. Maybe they were gone. Maybe they were just checked out, physically there, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. The details change, but the lesson is always the same. Silence meant you were alone with whatever was happening, and noise meant safety. Researchers found that 62% of adults who report needing constant background noise also describe growing up in homes where the emotional atmosphere was unpredictable, not necessarily abusive, just unpredictable. You never quite knew which version of your parents you were going to get on any given evening. And here is what is fascinating. Your brain learned something from that, something it never forgot. Psychologists call it hypervigilance. Your nervous system learned to stay on high alert because the environment kept changing without warning. But in plain language, it just means your brain treats silence the way most people treat a smoke alarm. It is not nothing. It is a signal. When the room goes quiet, your nervous system doesn't relax. It scans. It listens harder. It starts looking for what might be wrong. Because when you were small, silence usually came right before something bad happened. The quiet before the yelling. The calm before the door slammed. So background noise does something specific. It gives your brain just enough stimulation to stop scanning. It is not distraction, it is regulation. And that is why you can't just sit in silence and relax. Your body doesn't know how to do that. It never learned. But there is another layer, and this one's going to hit different if you've ever been told you might have attention issues. Neuroscientists talk about something called baseline arousal. It is basically how awake your brain is when nothing's happening. For most people, a quiet room keeps their brain at a comfortable idle. But for some brains, quiet isn't idle. It is understimulated. Your brain in silence isn't resting, it is bored. And a bored brain doesn't sit still. It spirals. It overthinks. It replays every cringe moment on a loop. Psychologists call this understimulation seeking. But you just call it needing noise to think straight. And here is the weird paradox. The noise actually makes you calmer. It gives your brain just enough input to settle down and focus. That is why you can write a whole report in a loud coffee shop but can't focus in a silent room. It is not a flaw. It is neurochemistry. But here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. Sometimes the noise isn't about focus at all. Sometimes it is about what you hear when everything goes quiet. Not sounds. Thoughts. The ones you've been out running all day. Psychologists call it experiential avoidance. It means using external stimulation to keep yourself from sitting with uncomfortable internal experiences. But in real life, it sounds like this. You turn on a podcast the second your brain starts going somewhere. You don't want it to go. You can't fall asleep without a show playing, because the minute it is dark and quiet, your mind starts replaying things. Old arguments, old mistakes, old versions of yourself you thought you'd outgrown, and the noise doesn't solve any of that. but it does something almost as important. It turns down the volume on your own inner critic. And here's where it gets really interesting. There is a reason you are so specific about which noise works. Rain sounds, coffee shop ambience, reruns of shows you've seen 40 times. It is never random noise. It is always familiar noise, predictable noise. Dr. Stephen Porges calls this neuroception. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for cues of safety or danger, mostly without you knowing. Familiar noise is one of the strongest safety cues there is. It tells your brain nothing bad is coming. You can let your guard down. That is why you rewatch the same shows. Not because you are boring, because your brain already knows what happens next. And that is the whole point. It is the opposite of your childhood. Back then, nothing was predictable. The house could shift without warning. So now you build spaces where nothing surprises you. But here's the part that might sting a little. There is a cost to this, and you already know what it is. You haven't sat in real silence in years, maybe longer. And the things that silence would let you feel, the grief, the loneliness, the questions about your life, they're still in there, waiting. Psychologists call it emotional backlog. The accumulation of unfelt feelings that builds up when you consistently avoid processing them. And background noise is one of the most socially acceptable ways to maintain that backlog. Nobody judges you for having a podcast on. Nobody stages an intervention over a white noise machine. But your nervous system knows the difference between coping and healing. And noise, as comforting as it is, only does one of those things. And that doesn't mean you need to white-knuckle your way through silence. That is not the point. Forcing yourself to sit in quiet when your whole body is screaming isn't brave. It is just re-traumatizing. The real shift happens when the noise becomes a choice instead of a reflex. When you can notice the discomfort without reaching for the remote. Not because silence is better, but because you are finally safe enough to hear what it has to say. And here is what is beautiful about people like you. You figured this out on your own. Nobody taught you how to regulate your nervous system. Nobody explained why quiet rooms made your skin crawl. You just found a solution. Rain sounds, reruns, podcasts about murders. You built yourself a sound blanket and wrapped it around every quiet moment. That is not weakness. That is a kid who figured out how to survive a house that was too quiet or too loud, and carried that toolkit into adulthood. The noise was never the problem. It was the answer. The problem was a world that taught you silence was dangerous before you had the tools to feel safe in it. And maybe one day the noise becomes quieter, not because you forced it, but because you don't need it as loud anymore. Maybe you start with 5 minutes, then 10, and the silence doesn't feel like a threat anymore. It just feels like a room, not empty, not dangerous, just quiet, and that is enough. So, if you are someone who can't function without background noise, this isn't a call to change. It is a call to understand. You are not broken. You are adapted. You learn to fill silence because silence once meant something terrible. And the fact that you found a way to make it bearable says everything about you, even when nobody else was. And that matters more than you think. If this hit home for you, please subscribe. And if you want to support these deep dives, hit that join button. I would genuinely appreciate it, because some of us learn to fill the silence long before the silence learned to be kind. And there is nothing wrong with that.